Have you ever heard of Cleopatra? Of course you have. She's the most famous queen of Egypt, the woman who seduced both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and the last pharaoh of her dynasty. But hidden behind Cleopatra's shining legacy is a darker story, the story of her younger sister, Arsinoe IV. And unlike Cleopatra, Arsinoe's life didn't end in beauty or glory. It ended in betrayal, exile, and a death so brutal it still shocks historians today. But to understand Arsinoe's fate, you need to step back into one of the most dangerous families in ancient history, the Ptolemies. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years after the death of Alexander the Great. But make no mistake, this wasn't a dynasty of peace and unity. It was a dynasty built on blood. Brothers killed brothers. Sisters poisoned sisters. Parents plotted against children, and children plotted against parents. And in the middle of this swirling storm of jealousy and ambition was Arsinoe. She was born into a royal household where survival wasn't guaranteed. Even for a princess, every smile at the dinner table could hide a dagger. Every embrace could end with poison in the cup. By the time Arsinoe was a teenager, Egypt itself was falling apart. The once great Nile kingdom was drowning in debt. Roman generals lurked across the Mediterranean, eager to pull Egypt into their empire. And inside Alexandria, Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy XIII were locked in a brutal power struggle for the throne. This was the world Arsinoe grew up in, a place where ambition meant survival and hesitation meant death. Now, you might think a younger sister would stay out of this chaos. Not Arsinoe. She wanted power. And when Julius Caesar himself arrived in Egypt to settle the royal dispute, Arsinoe made her move. At just 15 years old, Arsinoe fled the palace and joined a group of Egyptian generals who hated Caesar's presence. To them, Cleopatra was nothing but Caesar's puppet, a woman willing to betray her country for Roman power. But Arsinoe, she became their symbol of resistance. Picture it, a teenage princess standing at the head of a rebel army, declaring herself the true queen of Egypt. The soldiers loved her. The generals rallied to her side. And in a stunning twist, Arsinoe was proclaimed pharaoh by the rebels. Her first act as queen? War. Caesar was holed up in Alexandria with Cleopatra. Arsinoe and her army surrounded the city, cutting off supplies and choking the Romans inside. She wasn't just playing politics anymore. She was waging war against the greatest general in the world. And for a time, she almost won. The siege of Alexandria dragged on for months. Fires tore through the city. Blood ran through the streets. And while Caesar struggled, Arsinoe's reputation grew. Here was a teenage girl who dared to defy Rome itself. But power is a dangerous flame, and Arsinoe's rise sparked jealousy even among her allies. Her leading general, Achilles, began to overshadow her. The soldiers cheered his name louder than hers. And in the poisonous world of the Ptolemies, that could not be tolerated. So Arsinoe had him executed. Think about that. A teenage princess ordering the death of her own commander just to keep her grip on power. To the Romans, she was dangerous. To her own people, she was ruthless. And to Cleopatra, she was a direct threat. But Caesar was no ordinary enemy. In 47 BC, Roman reinforcements stormed into Alexandria. Arsinoe's forces collapsed. She was captured, dragged in chains before Caesar himself. Now, most rebels would have been executed on the spot. But Arsinoe was young, and Caesar loved the spectacle. So instead of killing her, he paraded her through the streets of Rome in his grand triumph. Imagine the humiliation. Arsinoe, once crowned pharaoh, was forced to march through Rome like a caged animal, her chains glinting in the sun as crowds jeered. The people of Rome had never seen anything like it. A young Egyptian queen brought low before their eyes. But the strangest part? The crowd pitted her. Her youth, her beauty, her defiance. It stirred something in the Romans. They begged Caesar not to execute her. And in a rare moment of mercy, he agreed. Arsinoe's life was spared. But she was not free. Instead, she was banished to the temple of Artemis in Ephesus, a grand sanctuary in what is now Turkey. It was holy ground, and under Roman law, she could not be harmed there. To the outside world, it might have seemed like safety, but to Arsinoe it was a gilded cage. She was alive, yes, but trapped powerless, waiting. And back in Egypt, Cleopatra never forgot, because while Arsinoe lived, she was a threat. Think about it. Cleopatra had fought tooth and nail to hold on to her throne. She had seduced Caesar, allied with Rome, and clawed her way to power. But somewhere across the sea, her younger sister, once crowned pharaoh, was still breathing, still watching, still dangerous. Years passed. Cleopatra's power grew. Caesar was assassinated, and Mark Antony rose as Rome's new strongman. And once again, Cleopatra bound Egypt to him through love and politics. But there was a shadow in her mind. Arsinoe, alive, waiting. And Cleopatra was not the kind of woman who tolerated rivals. The wheels of betrayal were already turning. Arsinoe had escaped death once, dragged in chains through Rome, humiliated before thousands. She had lived only because the crowd begged for her life. Now she sat inside the walls of the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, one of the greatest wonders of the ancient world. It was beautiful, yes. White marble columns soared into the sky. Golden statues gleamed in the sunlight. Pilgrims came from across the world to pray there, and by Roman law, no blood could be spilled within its walls. But to Arsinoe, the temple was not freedom. It was a cage. She was still young, barely in her 20s, but her dreams of ruling Egypt had been stripped away. No crown, no army, no throne, only the title of exile. Yet she was alive, and as long as she lived, Cleopatra had reason to fear, because Cleopatra knew something about power that Arsinoe also understood. In politics, survival itself was a threat. As long as Arsinoe breathed, she could inspire rebellion. She could return. She could rise again. And Cleopatra could not allow that. For a few years, Arsinoe lived quietly inside the temple. The priestesses gave her food and shelter. Pilgrims whispered about her, the young Egyptian queen who had once dared to defy Rome. She walked the courtyards. She prayed beneath the towering statues of Artemis. To the outside world, she seemed at peace, but rumors began to stir. Whispers spread through Alexandria that Arsinoe was planning a return, that Egyptian rebels might rally around her once more, that she still claimed the throne. Whether those rumors were true or not didn't matter. Cleopatra believed them, and when Cleopatra believed someone was a threat, death was never far behind. By this time, Julius Caesar was gone, murdered on the floor of the Roman Senate. Cleopatra had already seduced Rome's next great general, Mark Antony. And Antony was not just her lover, he was her weapon. Cleopatra knew she couldn't send assassins into the Temple of Artemis. The sanctuary was too sacred. Killing Arsinoe, there would be a crime against the gods themselves. But Cleopatra also knew something else. Antony had the power to bend laws. And Antony was drunk on her charm. In 41 BC, Antony traveled to Ephesus, where the Temple of Artemis stood. He came as a conqueror, as a lover of Cleopatra, as the most powerful man in the Eastern Roman world. And when Cleopatra whispered her fears about Arsinoe into his ear, Antony agreed. The order was given. It was a quiet evening when the Roman soldiers arrived. The temple was lit by torches, the air heavy with incense. Arsinoe, unaware of what awaited her, may have been inside her chamber or walking in the courtyard. But then, the heavy boots of Roman legionaries echoed through the halls. The priests protested. This was holy ground, they cried. The gods would curse anyone who shed blood here. But Antony's men didn't care. They had their orders. Arsinoe was dragged from the sanctuary. The temple steps, once a place of prayer, became her stage of execution. She must have known then this was the end. Some accounts say she begged for her life. Others say she walked proudly, defiant until the last moment. But what all sources agree on is this. Arsinoe was murdered right there, outside the sacred temple, her blood staining the stones of one of the 7 wonders of the world. She was only around 21 years old. The priests were horrified. The people of Ephesus were outraged. To kill a young woman, a queen, within the shadow of Artemis's temple was unthinkable. It was a crime against both gods and men. But Antony didn't care. Cleopatra didn't care. To them, Arsinoe was just one more rival, one more threat erased. Her body was left to rot, A warning to anyone who might dare to challenge Cleopatra again. And here's the chilling part. Cleopatra had killed her own sister. This wasn't unusual for the Ptolemies. Their dynasty was infamous for bloodshed within the family. Brothers killed sisters. Sisters killed brothers. But for us, looking back, it is a reminder of just how brutal the struggle for power could be. Think about it. Arsinoe had once been crowned pharaoh. She had led armies against Rome. She had humiliated Caesar, if only for a moment. And yet, her life ended not on the battlefield, not in a palace, but on the steps of a temple, cut down like a criminal. For Cleopatra, it was a victory. She had secured her throne, removed her rival, and tightened her grip on Egypt. But history never forgets. Cleopatra's own end would come years later, when Rome finally crushed her and Mark Antony. She would die in her palace, remembered as a queen of beauty and tragedy. But Arsinoe's story? Her story is darker, crueler, and in some ways, even more haunting. Because Arsinoe wasn't remembered for her charm or her politics. She was remembered for her horrific death. Murdered in exile, sacrificed to her sister's ambition. Now imagine this. A young woman, barely out of girlhood, chained and paraded through Rome, declared pharaoh by rebels, leading armies against Caesar himself, and then, years later, dragged down temple steps to be killed at the command of her own sister. This isn't myth. This isn't legend. This is history. And it tells us something chilling about ancient Egypt. In the world of the Ptolemies, family meant nothing. Blood meant nothing. Power was everything. For the ordinary people of Egypt, it was a time of fear and uncertainty. One day, they hailed Cleopatra as queen. The next, they whispered about Arsinoe's ghost. Did her spirit haunt the temple where she died? Did Artemis curse the murderers who spilled blood on her steps? We may never know, but the truth is clear. Arsinoe's horrific death is one of the darkest chapters of the Ptolemaic dynasty, and yet her story is rarely told. History remembers Cleopatra. Hollywood remembers her. But Arsinoe? She's been pushed into the shadows, forgotten by time. Maybe because her story is too unsettling. Maybe because her end was too cruel. But when we look closer, Arsinoe's life is a warning. It warns us of what ambition can do. It warns us of what family rivalry can destroy. And it warns us that even in the most sacred places, violence can find a way in. So the next time you think of Cleopatra, the glamorous queen who ruled Egypt, remember her sister. Remember Arsinoe, the girl who dreamed of being pharaoh, who fought Caesar, who was paraded in chains, who thought she had found sanctuary, only to die under her sister's orders.